Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to talk about today's topic. It's something, right? Like a lot of the conversations that I'm having with founders and operators are about market hasn't been as kind as it was a couple of years back. How do we still grow and thrive in that environment? I'm very excited and glad to welcome Mike in this session. Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. So those of you who don't know Mike, Mike has a really long history of being a biller, a manager, a managing director of one of the very fast growing recruiting companies. Mike has successfully expanded his business with offices in London, Edinburgh, Dublin, Sydney, Melbourne, Wellington, and Bangkok. Right? Like so. That's spanning across 3 different continents, right? Mike now is founder of recruitmenttraining.com, which is a home to over 780 videos for recruiters and managers to train themselves, to upskill themselves, to be ready for this new reality that we find ourselves in, right? Like so, in recent few years, Mike has really immersed himself with AI. And he's dedicated more than 500 hours to experiment, monitor, to figure out how recruiting would change with AI. And so if you don't follow Mike on LinkedIn, please do that. He has some really interesting content to share. Mike, again, welcome. And thank you so much for doing this. Let's start with something easy, right? Give us a little bit more about recruitment training and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
I think you've kind of summed it up, Manan, to be honest, and thank you for inviting me on. So yeah, I mean, the training resources are powerful. One company I worked with grew from 6 million to 100 million turnover. I was chairman of the board for that business. And I saw a post from them on LinkedIn, which really pleased me because they exited successfully. And they put all successful recruitment companies that they've been involved with post their exit from that company, have L&D at the core of the business. So how do you become a superstar business development person? Well, hard work, great work ethic, good personality and so on, but use the best techniques. And I'm astonished how many techniques people don't know. People with 20 years experience that I'm coaching a 2.6 million pound biller at the moment. I spoke today to a 3.9 million Australian dollar biller. So, and there are things that, they're hungry for fresh knowledge in order to capitalize. So forgive me, but let me not go into detail about my training resources. Suffice it to say that it contains the world's best business development and candidate sourcing content, in my opinion. The proof of that is the users, of course. But yeah, let's dive into today's session and hopefully give as much value as I can.
Perfect, great. So let's dive right in, right? Like so, Mike, we started with that market hasn't been as kind as it was a couple of years back. So now this is an observation that some of our customers have made to me, right? Like, and also we. Couple of times a year, we analyze all the large publicly listed companies in the industry and analyze their financial results. And they also tell a similar story. I want to hear from you, right? Like, what are you hearing about market conditions and impact on the way that recruiting businesses work with clients? Like, what are the kind of different, how has that dynamic changed in the last 2-3 years?
Let me tell you straight from a conversation today. One recruitment managing director I spoke to, and he said he's trebled his contractor base in the last 5 months. So, and I asked him, what did he do? And he said, basically, I got back on the tools. I personally, got out there and used his skill and expertise, which is superior to that of the staff working for him. And he smashed into the market as a, Tyro salesperson to make it happen. People who are complaining about the market, like let's take the global financial crisis, many years back now. And there was weeping and grinding of teeth and people complaining. And in the UK, I operate globally. I'll use the UK as an example. And the spend on recruitment had gone down from something like 30 billion to 26 billion, reported by the major trade association over there. 30 billion to 26 billion. And people were complaining about that. It was my mindset was, hold on, That's 26 billion pounds of spend. How much of that do
Yeah.
you need as a business with 10 staff? How much of that do you need? So the job is go out and get that business. And so some of the coaching I'm doing, you'd be surprised how many people they're talking about the market, but doing nothing about it. And the ones that try to do it, sometimes, unfortunately, they're using old-fashioned techniques, ineffective techniques. So, of course, the market has suffered as a general whole, but people are still spending money. People are still replacing top talent. If you lose a superstar, then you're not going to bury your head in the sand as an employer and say, look, we're not hiring unless you're in significant financial trouble. So the skill
Yeah.
of the recruiter, one of the skills is to identify underperformers. It's to find out when people are leaving and chase after those roles. One very simple business development strategy. And so I think there are pockets of the market. I did a blog on recruitmenttraining.com just a few days ago where I analyzed the improvement of various sectors over the last 6 months. Anyone can go to that blog on recruitmenttraining.com, take a look at the results. So, one option, if you're in a really market that's suffering and being hit hard by AI, perhaps, is to pivot. But you want to pivot to the right market. But my advice to people before you pivot is, are you working hard enough in your own market?
Yeah.
Are you putting the hard yards in? Because business development, I love business development. I found it fun, to be honest. And, but I did sometimes 5 hours a day, 5 hours a day. And I'm hearing other people, they're playing at it. You need to if you're in a tough market, you've got to focus on business development in a big way. And part of that is collecting intelligence from candidate conversations. I've listened to about 400 call recordings, recruiter, candidate, and so on, and recorded Teams meetings. They're missing huge opportunities. Incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about things like where have you been on interview? I mean, that's quite obvious. I'm looking about other things like, so what, if any, internal interviews have you attended in the last few months? Really, you went on an interview today? Now, how many people ask that question? The answer is tiny, tiny numbers. And by the way, if you're a recruiter and you've ever asked the question, where have you been on interview? And the candidate has said to you, I'd prefer not to say, because they've been well briefed by the current supplier, then they never say that to the technique that I just shared with you. And that can identify a potential opening with some skillful follow-up, by the way. But that's just one simple example. There are many, many more things you can get from candidate conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something, right? Like if, tracking career movements of people in the industry, right? Like, so I see a lot of familiar names in the audience, but some who don't, right? Like we have this, earlier this year, we launched this feature called Job Change Alerts, right? Like, so if anybody in your database changes jobs or even job titles, right? Like you will be notified, right? Like, so the way some of our customers have really benefited is, a placement that they made about a couple of years back is now, a senior management, they're probably hiring, they have an existing relationship, right? Like, so as soon as they get promoted, they are there in front of them, congratulating, maybe sending, a gift or something and saying, hey, you know what? We obviously had great relationship together. I placed you there after all. If you need any help building your team, I'm here for you, right? Like just something as simple as that, right? Like I mean, call it, right? Like being, systematically being at the right place at the right time. Right, like so.
I love that. When I saw that feature, I did a post about it, man. I don't know if you saw that because I shared that it's a very simple innovation, and I used to call that technique CV waivers. Let's say, a recruiter is on a job board today, and the CV has recently been updated. That CV is waving at you and saying, I'm leaving my current company. My boss doesn't know I'm leaving, but you know because I've just waved at you to tell you that I'm going to leave this company. So, why would you not stay close or find a mechanism to get in front of that client because you know that a vacancy is imminent? And of course, your tool takes that a step further in terms of immediately giving the alert.
Absolutely. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this, right? Like there is a lot of anxiety around calling, especially cold calling, right? And I'm sure you see it all the time. And there's definitely an age thing, right? My observation, and I can be very, very wrong, but my observation is that the older people, right, like people in their 30s, late 30s, 40s, right, like much easier. They are much more comfortable being on the phone, and the younger understand from you, right? Like, first of all, right, like, do you still see being on the phone calling as a valid channel in the world today? And if so, right, like, how do these MDs, right, like, they help their, the younger people in their teams get over that anxiety and be really, really good at it?
Sure. I think you can't be a one-trick pony with business development. You need to use all the different strategies, including LinkedIn social selling, which, by the way, only 5% of recruiters are really maximizing on creating inbound leads from LinkedIn posting. So it's unbelievably good. It's the step change in the last 3 years in the recruitment industry. So if you're not doing LinkedIn posting, really study that closely. We built a full course around it within our offering, by the way. But you can't just be a one-trick pony. People send emails. I'm not so sure about that. Okay, I'm sure it works to some degree. Calling. I've not made a cold call for 30 years. I've made thousands of calls, but I make warm calls. The skill of this is to find a valid reason for the call. So one very simple example is a verbal reference. So if I interview you, Manan, and I found out that in your last job you were a director at Tesla, and Tesla's my target company, and I have a good conversation with you, and I talk about your key achievements. And I say, so those are tremendous key achievements, Manan. Thank you for sharing them with me. Has any other recruitment company ever gone into that depth with those key achievements? They haven't. That's surprising. The reason we do it is because it helps us to position you more attractively to employers. And therefore, sometimes it can help tip the balance where they see you and can even help you to get a better job. That's the reason we do it. And thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. The thing is, I'm going to need some substantiation of what you've just told me. So who could vouch for what you've just told me there? So, of course, we don't want to let the cat out of the bag that you're leaving your current job, but ideally, I'd be able to put a call into your previous boss and just to get him to ratify some of the things that you've discussed with me. Now, notice I'm setting it up and selling the benefit to the candidate of giving me the referee details. That's a simple way into that conversation now. Ring, ring. Hello, I'm calling. What's the calling connection with? I'm calling to take a reference on, go to HR. Well, I don't want to go to HR. So the mistake I'm role playing with myself is I never say I'm calling to take a reference. I'm calling to ask for your help in connection with Manan Shah, who used to work for you. All right, Manan. Now, I can't go into the full skill of that call, but I've seen posts on LinkedIn saying referencing doesn't work. It's absolute nonsense. It's a highly refined skill. So the 2.6 million pound biller I'm coaching right now, one of his business development strands is referencing. The $3.9 million Australian biller, one of his strands of business development is referencing. Please tell me, do you want to build 2.6 or 3.9 million? And do you want to mentally dismiss it and think it doesn't work? Because the first time you tried it or the second time you tried it, it failed. When a technique fails, you've got to look at the delivery. So, I mean, either I'm talking nonsense, in which case never engage with me again, or I'm telling you as it is that it's often delivery. How do I know? Because I've coached and trained many, many people, and I've listened to many, many calls, and they make basic blunders, like I'm calling to take a reference. I never say that, just to repeat from earlier. So that's a warm call into a conversation. Here's another business development strategy. Very, very simple indeed. And it's called senior candidate tracking. Senior candidate tracking doesn't involve cold calls. You've already got the phone number. I mean, if you interview, say, I'll just use a nominal figure. You interview or talk to 100 managerial level candidates over a period of time, right? How are you nurturing those people to turn them into your clients? How do you qualify which ones will become your clients and which ones are worth investing more of your time? So here's what I do. So Manan, one of the key things that employers value in people at your level is the ability to build teams. Could you please tell me about the teams you've built over the years and how you went about it? Now, that's a valid interview question, which is beneficial if I was trying to place you, because I can truthfully tell my client, Manan's a great team builder, he can bring that skill to the business. But the underlying benefit to me is if I know you hire 10 people a year in this company, 10 people a year in the previous company, 15 in the previous company, you're a serial hirer and you're likely to do that in your next organization, regardless of whether I place you or not. So there's a special nurturing strategy, which means that you can that person can come to you quite often, even if your competitor places that individual. My best
Yeah.
example of that is a guy in the UK who went from 300,000 a year to 1.8 million pounds. And he told me the number one reason for the increase in billings was he really adopted the full senior candidate strategy, which I trained him on, which is beyond some of the basic elements I'm sharing right now, of course. So that's another little technique, which is very, very powerful. But answering the question about the MDs, there's a myth. Young people aren't like what they were in our day. Your father probably said it to you. My father said it to,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
music it's terrible. It's not like the Frank Sinatra. My son is 23 years old. He grew up in the way you described. Head down, 13 years old on his phone. He had a bent neck as far as I can remember. No idea what he was going to end up doing. I never focused him on selling. I never focused him on recruitment. He travels to Australia. He's been there for a couple of years now. When he arrived, I got a call and he rang me out the blue. He pitched me with a service. And I thought, is that my son's voice? And it was my son. And he pitched me with the sales pitch. And guess what he's selling? He's selling the top 3 listings on Google Maps to barbers and electricians and so on. He's 23 years old. That company is doing 40 million turnover, and it's staffed by people like him, youngsters who hit the phone. What do they do differently? They have exceptional selection in the first place and exceptional training. So the foundation for a managing director is you've got to get your internal recruitment strategy right. Don't let these people who've got anxiety through your door. Don't let them through your door. Work harder on your internal recruitment strategy. So there's a 23-part series called Recruiting Recruiters within recruitmenttraining.com. I mean, when I grew Parker Bridge with my colleagues, we grew that from 3 to over 100 people. That's a lot of recruiting. We really got good at this. And then we had world-class onboarding to really get them in the right mindset. And, a tip I would give to anybody who wants to improve their skills is practice. Now, a tennis player, a world-class tennis player, does not practice. Let's say Djokovic, who's won all those titles, yeah? He doesn't practice on the centre court of Wimbledon. He practices off the court. So what practice do recruiters do? How many role plays a week do they do to refine their skills so that they lose that anxiety? So there's a guy I'm coaching at the moment, 20 years experience. And he candidly said to me, so he's got back on the tools again. He's doing verbal referencing as one of his strategies. Remember, you can't be a one-trick pony. I'm teaching him a number of strategies. And it's working, and he's getting through to decision makers. And then he said this to me. He said, Mike, I'm finding myself in the friend zone. I've never heard it called that before, yeah, but I quite like the analogy. He said, I have a really nice chat with them, and then I kind of just say thanks, and that's the end of the call. So I've coached him on how to bridge the call professionally without appearing like a slimy salesperson, and how to actually convert that call with real professionalism. And then I said this to him. I said, who have you got to role play within the business? And he didn't. And I said, have you ever role played with ChatGPT? And he said, what do you mean?
Exactly.
And I said, no, I mean, actually talking to ChatGPT, prompting it with the persona of a reasonably difficult decision maker with the job title of the person that you're calling, and then practice that call and ask ChatGPT to give you feedback after the call has ended. And he said, I've never done that before. So a week later, I said, how'd you get on? And he said, I'm surprised how good it was.
Yeah.
So there's no excuse. Well, sorry, there is. The excuse is it's a tough market. Clients aren't interested, So do something about it, for goodness sake. One of those things is to get superior techniques. Another is to refine the technique and your delivery and get some kind of feedback. So when I'm onboarding people, I teach them very important mindset. And I work on mindset and sales ability in the first couple of days when I onboard people. And one of those mindsets is feedback is the food of champions. So you've got to be receptive to feedback. Otherwise, how do you improve? Because some people say, well, I'll make lots of calls. I'll learn on the job. You're not interested. That's your feedback. What do you learn from that? Surely it's better for someone to critique it and say, do you know what? I thought you were a bit pushy there. For these reasons. Did you realize that if you'd asked this question, the following might have happened? You got one referral. Why did you not ask for 2 referrals? Because he was very receptive. Things like that, So I think practice is a key part of this. In my business, we did 5 minutes a day, every single day for years.
Absolutely. Oh, we have, we hire very young reps, right? Like a couple of years out of sometimes just even fresh out of university. A training program that we have is very rigorous with, doing mock calls with their manager, doing mock calls with, with each other, everybody sitting together, listening to each other's calls and critiquing, right? Like, hey, you could have done this, or, oh, you did this really, really well. Maybe I should pick up from that, right? Like, so, and that's been really, really transformational for our team internally. And one thing that I have personally, right, like it has really helped me as a technique is if you a part of building relationship is getting more information, right? Like, understanding your candidate, your client better, right? Like, so that your job is to help them, right? Like your job as a salesperson is, or as a recruiter is be their Sherpa and to get into that right decision. And that means that you need to have a very deep understanding about that. And you're speaking to somebody for the first time, it's difficult. At least I found, initially I found it difficult to get them to open up. And one technique that has really, really worked for me is mirroring, right? Like, and mirroring is where something very simple. So Mike tells me, oh, you know what? I think my recruiters are not very efficient, right? Yeah, no, that makes sense, Mike. That's a problem. You said efficient, right? Like what does efficiency mean to you, right? Like, so here what I'm doing is I'm just using a word that Mike used and just flipped it as a question back to him to kind of go deeper. So here Mike thinks that Mike knows that I'm very, very intently listening to him. So I'm using the exact same word that he did. And at the same time, right, like I'm getting Mike to open up. I'm getting them to give me more information, right? Like, so wonderful. It's very simple. Works very really, simple. Really well.
The thing is, a lot of people in recruitment come into recruitment, maybe get a little bit of training. In fact, I did a survey. I think it was about 160 people voted on the survey. This is only a couple of weeks ago. And I asked them about the extent of the training they've had. Only 17% said they've had world-class structured internal training. So you're letting your people down if you don't, invest in developing that further. The secret to selling is questioning. And of course, you've got to be able to close, but the foundation for it is questioning. And asking the best questions is a skill in its own right, and knowing what the best questions are to ask. But if I'm teaching sales in recruitment, I tend to ask people, what is it that you sell? And you get people in the audience, and they say, we sell service. No. We sell candidates. No. We sell ourselves. No. And I leave it like that, where they're getting me with a few things. Say, look, you sell solutions to problems. So you've got to take your clients into problem land. You've got to find out what their problems are. Now, if you want to win business from a competitor and the client says, I'm happy with my current suppliers, they tar everyone with the same brush. They're just pesky recruiters. They're all the same, So I'm happy with my current suppliers. But if I can uncover something, so there's a technique I call the window ledge. The window ledge is the client saying, look, it's all very well, but I haven't got time for this. And, my current supplier, I'm actually pretty happy with anyway. So you're on that window ledge and you're holding on before the call ends. And you say, just one more thing before I go. Just one more thing before I go, Mr. Clem. It was interesting to talk to you about the interviews earlier in the conversation. Could I ask you a quick question? Because I'm doing a survey on this. Say out of every 10 people you interview, how many would you say are just clearly not right for your needs? Oh, look, at least 5 out of 10. Oh, my goodness, I'm sorry to hear that. Now that we're chatting about that, I mean, what are the typical reasons why they're not right? Well, personality fit, technical fit, blah, blah, blah. And how long is each interview? Do you mind me asking? About an hour. Right, so that's 5 hours of senior management time. And what have your current suppliers done to reduce the risk of that happening, that time wastage? They haven't done anything. Well, in our business, this is what we do, blah, 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 blah. How does that sound in comparison to what you've been receiving? Well, I must admit, it sounds better, but, I don't really know. The proof's in the pudding, isn't it? Absolutely, you're right, Mr. Client. So why don't we book a time in the diary and I'll share some strategies that will help to inject cost and time savings into your hiring strategy for free. I'll also share with you some ideas that will help you to position your company more attractively so that better quality talent wants to work for you. How about middle of next week? Oh, I'm too busy middle of next week. And then You've got to learn the art of closing as a business developer in the call,
Yeah.
not I'll call you back in 2 months. That's weak
Yeah.
business development. I'm
Yeah.
closing 7 times out of 10 when someone says, I'm too busy to meet you. And I'm closing before the call ends and they are going into my diary. Why? Because I've practiced and role played and worked it out and thought of superior ways to deliver things that give me a better return, meaning that I meet the client and my competitor calls them back in 2 months. On that meeting, guess what I'm going to do? This is a big, big one, man. I see not happening. It's probably the biggest thing in business development. On that meeting, you do not come back to the office and say to your boss says, how'd you get on? Great meeting, built a great relationship. That's not closing. That's having a
Yeah.
chat. Closing is, yes, Mike, I'll call you exclusively the next time I hire. At the end of the meeting, shaking hands. Then, when I get back to the office, I send an email. Dear Manan, it was a pleasure to meet you earlier today. I'm delighted you'll be calling me exclusively the next time you hire. Should you wish to discuss any other areas that I can help you to inject cost and time savings into your hiring strategy, feel free to call me on this number at any time. A few weeks later, depending upon, how often they hire, I'm back on the phone. The client says, thanks for calling, Mike, but we're still not hiring. Good to stay in touch. Appreciate that. Oh, I just want to say thank you. Well, what's that for? I want to say thank you for your commitment to work with me exclusively when you next hire. I presume you're still comfortable with that. Yes, I am, Mike. Email goes out. Dear Manan, good to catch up again earlier today. Many thanks once again for your commitment to work with me exclusively, blah, blah, blah. So you have a systematic sales process. Now, some people are cynical about this, man, and they say, oh, people aren't going to stick to their word. And guess what? They are right. Some of them do not stick to their word. But at the moment, you've got zero sticking to their word.
Yeah.
You're not closing any of them. So let's say, if you with skill, let's say you could close, like I can, by the way, 9 out of 10 to commit to work with me exclusively or first. First is okay if I have to drop down. Then that's 90 out of 100. Okay. Let's assume 50% of them are fickle. That's 45. Let's slash it in half again. That's 22. Okay, we'll just slash it in half again and call it 10. If those 10 clients who you've closed to commit to work with you exclusively all recruit 5 times a year, that's 50 vacancies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and business developers have to be client meetings. You've got to be going on client meetings. And again, I've done sessions all around the world, in the States, in Canada, in South Africa, widely across Europe, in Singapore, out in Asia where I am now, in Australia. And I've had audiences of 200 people in the room. And I've done a straw poll, and that's all it is. And I've said, how many people in the room go on at least 5 meetings a month? And hands go up. How many go on 8, 9? Some hands go down. 12 hands go down. 20. 1 or 2 people in the room. So you've got to, and then the next question then for cynics is, how am I going to fit all that in when I've got to fill jobs? Well, I was exactly the same. So for me, I steered people to meet me at times that suited me. Early morning, lunchtime. I've got to eat, so I'll buy my client a sandwich. Early morning before work. I'm hard working. I'll meet them for a coffee before work, or after work for a quick drink after work. So I can do it in time where I can still be productive in other parts of the day.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, 20 meetings in a month is only 5 meetings in a week, 1 a day. And if you go to see 1 client and there's 3 hiring people in the company, well, you've got 3 straight away for your 5. So those are things that can be trained and taught. They're actually not that difficult. But to summarize, the core skill of closing for commitment, and this transitions directly into telesales, is the ability to uncover a trail of destruction left behind by the current supplier that the client never even considered before they spoke to you and before you examined that trail of destruction. Things like 7 out of 10 people I interview are not right.
There is one more, especially when you are going after larger accounts, right? Like they have preferred suppliers, right? And very easy exit for the prospects there is that, hey, we can only work with our purchase department, only lets us work with preferred suppliers or approved vendor list or whatever name you call it. How do you deal with that objection?
Sure. Well, the first thing to consider is some of them are a poison chalice. Do you, and that's the thing, people consider them to be the absolute, aim. And of course, some of them can be highly lucrative, but some of them are not. I mean, I invested in a recruitment company and they got on the PSL of a major corporate in Europe. And they had 340 internal recruiters. It's a 13 billion euro turnover business. Believe it or not, they managed to close the client to give them 100 exclusive vacancies a month. Sounds fantastic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a nightmare. It was hard to make money. There were very difficult vacancies. They were paying under market rate. And, they hired a team of 17 resources to fulfill. And they didn't make money on it. And ultimately, unfortunately, contracts of employment were sent out late. Offers were sent out late. So be careful what you wish for sometimes. Yeah, it might not be the best. And then you've got tiny margins. Do you want to work on tiny margins, or do you want to headhunt their staff and place those staff somewhere else? But, having said that, some PSLs are worth being on, of course. Some of them are quite easy, some of them are straightforward, and some of them are very difficult. So we've got a PSL at the moment. I'm pleased to hear that. That's a sign of a professional company. I don't really work on many PSLs. I specialize in placing high demand, hard to find candidates. Can I ask you, which difficult roles are your current providers working on that they're struggling to fill? That can sometimes give you a difficult vacancy. But here's the interesting thing. I know how to make vacancies easier to fill. That's a skill. It's a training skill. No one else appears to have thought of that. So when I meet the client, I'm talking in this hypothetical situation, no one else appears to have thought of it, including them. And I ask them questions and I find out that XYZ skill, in fact, is substitutable with another skill, or they don't need it necessarily. They wanted 10 years experience, but 5 years experience will do. And suddenly I'm filling that role. So even when you get that really difficult role, sometimes you can turn that around. With the more difficult PSLs, I'll tell you the story of two things that might help. One in the AI world, which could be valuable to the listeners. And the second is a 20 million spend account over a period of time. And this was BT, British Telecom, and it was huge back in the day, particularly for contractors. So this recruitment company was trying to get in for a year and could not get in. So they decided to stand outside British Telecom's offices with a clipboard and interview people that were leaving the building. And they built up like a research dossier of problems and issues, compiled it into a report, contacted the appropriate person that they had solutions to these problems, got the meeting, got onto the PSL and took over. Okay. That's an unusual strategy. In today's world, use deep research. Now, when I say deep research, I say, what AI are you using? Oh yeah, we're using AI. Yeah. What are you using? ChatGPT. I'm thinking, what? ChatGPT is the only AI that you know? Wake up. The world has changed. I mean, you know all about this, Manon, obviously, but a lot of people do not. They don't even know about deep research. Deep research is free in certain AI. So, and it's in the search bar, it's a drop down. It says deep research. So, for example, I helped one of my clients yesterday with this. Same issue, PSLs. So the target client is company X. Okay, so step one is to say in normal AI, not deep research, create a prompt for deep research that will evaluate recruitment problems and challenges within company X within the last 12 months. Wherever possible, highlight a financial cost or an opportunity cost to the business and show me evidence of where you're getting the information from, blah, blah, blah. I'm just free-forming here. I'll do that a bit more clearly. Yeah. The AI creates a wonderful prompt. I then check the prompt and make a few little edits. Then I switch to deep research mode and put the prompt into deep research. 15 minutes later is a dossier. That's what I'd like to call it. It's like what the BT guy did years ago, but better. And it's done incredibly well. You can now use that as part of something you can differentiate yourself with to those organizations.
Absolutely.
The third strand of cracking those PSLs is networking. So, you've got to get an internal champion in some businesses, and you've got to invest some time. You've got to decide, is it worth it? That's the first step, as I mentioned earlier. Some PSLs, you don't want to be on there. tiny margins, horrible working practices. Try your best to avoid the icebergs. But let's assume it is one you want to be on, or you're fact finding. Find somebody internally, take them out. So for me, I'm not an alcoholic, by the way, but I'd take them out for a beer. You know, if you don't drink alcohol, that's fine. But I'd get them out, or a coffee, or a sandwich, and I'd pick their brains and I'd talk to them. And in that bar, I'd be uncovering problems and issues that they're having. And I'd be asking, what are the current suppliers doing to alleviate those problems? They're not doing that. This is what we do in our business. How does that sound in comparison to what you're receiving? It sounds superior. Right, okay. And what do you think about the idea earlier I described? Do you like that idea as well? And what about that idea? You like this idea? My goodness. Then would you like us to be on the PSL? Yeah, I'd love you to be on the PSL. How can you help us to get on the PSL? Now, if you can get some internal influencers, it's not just a salesperson trying to get on that PSL, it's people internally trying to help you. Those would be a few thoughts. There are more, of course, but I don't know if we've got time for all of it.
Unfortunately not. Well, people do that, right? Like I have this, I'll be as a manager, as you are scaling your BD function, right? Like, what are some of the key metrics that you advise people to track? That's number one. And number two, what are some of the key practice things, right? Like, so for example, make sure that you dedicate 30 minutes a week to monitor each rep's calls, right? Make sure that you do this, right? As a manager, how do I make sure that I get the best out of my reps, right? Like, so how do I track them, and how do I make them really, really good?
The big weakness in management and recruitment is that people are not managing. They think they're managing, they're not. They're not having one-to-ones that are focused in on exactly the point that you're talking about. Of course, some people are. I'm just don't want to tar the whole industry with the same brush. But for me, those one-to-ones are the heartbeat of sales, they're the heartbeat of business development, because I can hold you accountable. Now, I spoke to one company the other day. What do they measure? Call time. I'm thinking, call time? No. How do you improve people? Measure what I call PSMs. A PSM is a predictive success metric. So, for example, one of those might be verbal referencing. Now, if I can buy you into the concept as my staff member, that if you take verbal references with skill, success is predictable, well, why would you not do it? Therefore, let's say a reasonable metric was 5 in your business per week. As a manager, when I sit down with you and you've achieved 2, there's a skill for the manager now to coach you and improve your ability. So last week, Manan, your metric was 5 on verbal referencing. You achieved 2. Talk me through the reasons why you weren't able to achieve 5. And now the manager will get fluff. Busy week, lots of jobs called in, very good to be busy, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, the benchmark was built based upon a busy week. So let's see if we can find a solution to that. Here's a blank piece of paper. There's a pen. I'd like you to reflect on the week and think of any improvement at all where that you were blocked from getting those 5 verbal references. And then you go quiet. So there's a skill for managers, which is highly trainable, by the way, to then hold people accountable for business development, the best business development activities. And we're scratching the surface in the time we've got available. And then, of course, performance improves. Because instead of just doing whatever they want, you're holding people accountable. This is not micromanagement, by the way. It's a very sophisticated professional coaching style that makes people feel 10 feet tall when they leave those meetings. If I had time, I'd be able to explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, since we are on the topic, right? Like, if you're interested, right? Like one book that has really, really helped me become a better salesperson is this one called Never Split the Difference by this, guy called Chris Voss. He was so the book is written with negotiation as its core focus. However, if you kind of expand its scope, right? Like I try to look at it, right? Like, as my job is to get as much information from my customers, from my prospects, really, really understand them better than anybody else can. Once I do that, that's half of my job done, right? Like, once I've done that, I think everything else becomes a little bit easy, I think. And you look at everything as with a negotiation lens, and it has great tactics, great techniques on how can you do that better, right? Like getting more information, establishing a common ground, being better at communication, right? Like, so that's something that we recommend internally to every sales hire that we make. Anyway, okay, we've gone really over time. It's been a pleasure having you over, Mike. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Mike, for all the wisdom and your time.
My pleasure. Have a good rest of the day. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.